Hello, and welcome back to the My First Marathon podcast, where we interview runners in all stages of their running career about their first marathon experiences to prove that anyone can run a marathon. My name is Taylor, and today we talk to a runner, physical therapist, run coach, and social media influencer about the changes from her first marathon to her second. We dive into what a lot of us experience going from number one to number two, that you just don't know what you don't know. Because this runner has a unique experience being in the physical therapy world, we also talk about shoes, fuel, and more. I'm so excited for this episode. I personally was taking notes the entire time for my own running. So without further ado, please welcome Lisa. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the podcast this weekend. How's your weekend going so far?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So far, it's been pretty good. Knocked out a 16 miler today and just gonna do that like post run rot after. And I'm so excited for it.
That is what I look forward to my entire long run is the post run rot.
Yep, already had like some food, some coffee, like all the liquids. And now it's just like, all right, like just not moving from the couch for hours. It's amazing.
Yes, no, I love it. And you're training for your second marathon right now, the Marine Corps Marathon. So how many weeks out are we from Marine Corps at this point?
Yeah, we are 4 weeks out tomorrow because it's on Sunday. So
Sweet.
getting down to like the last couple, well, I guess I have one more like longer run and then I'm tapering. So I'm doing a 2-week taper this year. So I'm like excited that I only have like one more big run, but then it's like, like I can't believe it's almost here.
I know it flies by. It feels like it takes forever and flies by at the same time. I feel like,
Yep.
but yeah, we're getting close. That's exciting. So we're going to talk about a little bit about how things have changed now that you're training for your second marathon. But if we could maybe take it back a little bit, how did you get introduced to the running world in the first place?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Well, so I grew up not running. I grew up playing softball. I played softball in college. So when I was told to run, it was as a punishment. It was for discipline. You did something wrong, go run, a couple laps around the field. It wasn't for pleasure, for enjoyment. It was definitely like a negative connotation in my brain. So when I got to grad school, I think I was 22. I started running just like 2 to 3 miles just to stay in shape and mostly for like my mental health, just to like get a break from studying. And I stuck with that like 2 to 3 miles a couple of days a week for all 3 years of grad school. And then after grad school, I moved to Northern Virginia and like DC area. And that's when I got a job with a sports medicine clinic and I literally treated like 80% runners. I was like,
wow.
And they were all, this is so funny, actually, now that I think about it. They were all training for the Marine Corps Marathon.
Oh, funny.
And they were like, I don't know. It's just like funny thinking about it now. I kind of forgot about that. But
very full circle. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like thinking like, okay, as a new grad, you're basically like still a student. So I was like, all right, well, if I'm treating all these runners, like literally like 8 out of 10 of my patients every day were runners, then I need to get back into running because I kind of took a break after I graduated. I need to get back into running, and then I need to keep learning more about runners. So luckily I had really great mentors that I worked with, so I could ask them a bunch of questions, and it was like multiple people. So that was really nice. So that's kind of how I got more consistent into, I wouldn't even say higher mileage, but more than 2 to 3 mile runs. That's when I started like maybe like 4 or 5, like dabbling with like 4 or 5, mostly because I didn't have much to do after I graduated and I didn't know what to do with my free time. But that's when I started kind of getting curious about like what half marathon training would look like. And I would say that's when I really started falling more in love with running, mostly because the views and just like my mindset went from, okay, in grad school, like I'm going to run for my sanity, basically. And then after grad school, it was like, oh, this can be fun. Like this is enjoyable. I don't have to rush to get my run over, So that's kind of how my running journey started.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think I want to touch on something because I was also a team sport athlete, softball, so as well. So
That's
I get
awesome.
it. Running for punishment was definitely my relationship with running as well.
Yes.
Um, so when do you feel like I get a lot of newer runners say like that it doesn't feel good in the beginning. It's not fun. I'm not having fun, and that's why I don't stick with it. So what do you feel like helped you kind of like stick with it in the beginning when you were doing those 2, 3 mile, 4 mile, 5 mile runs?
So it's funny, like so we would have grad school, like our school was like 8 to 5. And literally after, like my entire class would go to the gym and we'd all just get on the treadmill. So
Oh,
I feel
nice.
like, or like most of us would. I had a lot of friends who would run at the same gym and we'd all just meet, run like 20, 30 minutes. And then we'd be like, all right, we'll go home and study our lives away. So I feel like having that like community of like building a routine, and like we didn't run every day, like sometimes we would do some workouts, but I definitely had my friend group in grad school was an active friend group, as you can expect with PTs.
Yeah,
So I feel like that definitely helped just keeping me like accountable, but also not, there was no pressure around like pace or distance. It was more just like we know that if we stay active, like it helps our stress and like more of like that mental health aspect.
for sure. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, surrounding yourself. It's hard to do by yourself in the beginning, so maybe surrounding yourself with a little bit of a community would be helpful for sure.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
well, cool. So then you said that you started to dabble or think about half marathons. How did that thought kind of come about? Was it just the natural progression? If I'm going to keep running, I'm going to run a race, or something different?
I remember, so when I lived in Northern Virginia and I was a new grad, I was actually pretty miserable, to be honest. I didn't know what to do with my time. Like, I basically went from studying and being in class 16 hours a day to like having all this free time. And I was like, what do people do with their free time? And if
Right.
you live in Northern Virginia, you know that like if you leave your house, there's traffic. So I didn't know, like, I never wanted to leave my house because there was traffic, but I also wanted to do something with my life and my free time. So I started, like I said, I started running more on the waterfront. And I would just like spend more time running. I would walk some. Like it was so casual and laid back. Like I actually appreciate those days a lot because I never rushed through my runs and like appreciated the views. But I remember New Year's Day, I remember opening my phone list. I don't even know how this came up, to be honest. I want to say like maybe I read an email. I honestly don't know. I remember opening my phone list and being like, what do I want to accomplish this year? And it was like, New Year's or New Year's goals. Like I was like, okay, I want to read some books. Like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. I want to pay back some loans. Like I want to get a dog. Like it was just kind of very vague. And then I was like, I also kind of want to run a half marathon. And it was just like it was I want to say it was random because I don't think I would have gotten an email for it, but it seemed very random at the time. I think it's because I like ran 6 miles once.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I just listed all these different goals that I had, and for some reason I put down running a half marathon on there. So I signed up that day for a half marathon. It was going to be, so this was like January 2019, and then the half was November 2019. So
Oh,
that's,
yeah, plenty of time.
yeah, and it's also like when you sign up for a race that far away, you're like, "Ah, no sweat. Like, I
Yeah,
got
yeah, yeah.
time to figure it out. Like, I'm not even nervous about it right now. I'll figure it out as it gets closer." So that was kind of like my New Year's goals, I guess you could say. I was like, I had a lot of goals on that list, and to be honest, I don't even know if I think the only one I got was getting a dog because I never actually made it to the half marathon because I got injured.
Oh, no, okay, so we'll get into that a little bit, but I
Yeah.
feel like that's something a lot of people can relate to with New Year's resolutions is, like,
Mhm.
you just kinda put something on the board and you hope for it, but or you hope that you'll shoot for it, but, and I love that the dog is the one that you stuck to, that's probably the one I would stick to too. But cool, so got injured, so maybe walk us through how we got from New Year's resolution to that point.
Yeah, so I'm gonna like give you my timeline of my life. So
Yeah.
it's January 2019. I'm living in Alexandria, Northern Virginia. I realize I don't want to live here because one, my family was in Richmond, Virginia, very homesick. like I said, mentally I was not in a great place. So I decided to move back home to Richmond in February of 2019. I bought a house the next month, and then I basically put running on the back burner as I was moving, basically moving back home and then moving into a house. It's just like very stressful. Also,
Yeah.
getting a new job in Richmond, like it was a lot of stress. And running just got put on the back burner. So fast forward to that summer, I had gotten a dog and I was like, oh shoot, my training plan like would start next week and I haven't run at all. And I was like, I better go see if I can run like 2 miles. Like that might be a good idea. Like there was no base building. It was just like, oh, well, let me go see if I can run 2 miles.
Yeah.
And then basically like I went 0 to 100 with my training plan. It's like I definitely forgot about this race, to be honest. And I still wanted to do it. I still tried, but I went 0 to 100 with my mileage. I didn't know what I was doing in terms of my running, like varying my intensities or my paces throughout the week. I had no idea what I was doing with that. And I didn't strength train. So it was just like, very like looking back, I definitely made a couple mistakes that I don't recommend doing. And eventually, I think it was like week 7, I was like, all right, I can't do this because I'm like limping after mile 6. So yeah. And I also didn't like, I tried rehabbing, but I don't think I was like, yes, I'm a PT, but I was also like not fully, it's almost like I wanted the injury to be an excuse of like my way out of the race. I don't
like
know if
you mentally weren't in it yet.
Yeah, I really wasn't mentally in it. I mean, it's like I wanted to do it, but I knew, I don't know, like I was like, okay, it wasn't heartbreaking to me that I like didn't go through with the race either.
Gotcha. What was the injury? Was it just like an overuse type of injury, do you think?
Yeah, it was also a very weird injury. I was asking like a bunch of PTs what they thought, and like no one really knew. It was okay, so it's basically my knee was hypermobile and it was causing my foot to go numb because of the way that it was like pinching on my nerve. So it was only happening when I was running. I tried the whole like I've tried like I don't know. It's funny because I'm like, yes, I'm a PT, but like sometimes when PTs are injured, we just turn into like everyday runners and we try all these things that we like don't
Yeah.
really recommend doing. Like I tried getting new shoes, I tried resting for 2 weeks, and now I'm like no better than that, but I have done these things. So it was a very different injury, and like by the time I actually figured this out, it was like 2 weeks from the race. So it was like, oh, I just don't have enough time to build my endurance. Like it was definitely a different injury. So it wasn't just like runner's knee or anything like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's so interesting. Like being a PT and then going through an injury yourself. Do you feel like that helped you understand some of those runners that were coming in and like beating themselves up a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely. And it also made me frustrated.
Yeah.
I totally, and this is not even like my first injury. So I'm very empathetic with runners. I understand like when a running injury, like it's never just I can't run or I have pain when running, because I know how it affected my entire life. Not to be dramatic, but it affected like my personality, it affected my mood, it affected my mental health. So I completely understand, and I feel like I've always been able to put myself into a runner's shoes or like a patient's shoes and just be able to understand where they're coming from. And because of that, I feel like I try like everything in my power to help every single runner that comes to me, because I know how like down in the dumps I was with my injury, and I don't want that. Like, everyone's going to respond differently in terms of like their mood and everything, but I know I don't want any runner to have to go through what I went through.
Yeah. Just having a little bit of perspective, I think, is so important. Just makes you a better resource for other runners for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So unfortunately we didn't get to the half marathon that year. Did you just defer it to a different year or just completely canceled it? Like where did we kind of go from there?
I don't even remember, to be honest. I think I thought about deferring and then I was like, oh, $20 to defer. Like, I'm house poor. Well, I think I just didn't do it. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think I just didn't do it. But I I also just, again, I don't think my head was like fully into like distance running at that point.
Yeah.
I hadn't fully like fallen in love with running. I don't know. I needed another like year or so to really get like the fire lit under my behind to start
Sure.
more distance running.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so after the half marathon, after I assume you took some time to kind of rehab and figure out what was going on with your injury and everything.
Mhm.
What did you do from there? Did you go to like a different type of movement, get back into running in a different way? How did we kind of progress?
Yeah, so I did what any runner who's injured should not do. And I basically pretended like I broke my leg and I didn't
Mm,
move from the couch for like months and it was terrible. And there was really no rhyme or reason behind it. I was just in like a weird mental slump. So like I said, I only had pain when I was running. So I could have done all these other things. I just chose
mhm,
not to. Just a weird like mental slump. And eventually I started working out again. Eventually I started really falling in love with like strength training.
mm,
And I remember, so this is like super random, but like I said, I lived in Richmond at the time. My work sent me to Virginia Beach with my puppy at the time to help open this clinic. And I was there for like 2 months. It was right before COVID. It was in the winter time at Virginia Beach. So it wasn't, super crowded or anything like that. And we lived in a hotel room and I had a
mm.
8-month-old golden retriever who
Oh
had
my gosh.
a ton of energy.
Yeah.
So I would walk him all the time. And finally I was like, I should try running with him. Like, I need to get his energy out. He's used to having a backyard. So that's actually when I started running again, was because of my dog. And I just think that's like so funny how everything works out. But that's
Yeah.
basically, I don't even know if I would have been gotten back into running if it wasn't for him. Like, because I started running like 1 mile at a time with him and like 2 miles at a time with him. And then I was like, oh, this is like, one, my leg feels great. Two, this is actually really fun. And he's like getting exercise. So that's how I gradually got back into it. And then COVID hit. So then I
Mm,
had like that segue into more time and then wanted to exercise more too.
yeah. That's funny how that was your New Year's resolution and then ended up like
I know.
working its way into running anyways.
I know. I have so many like, like full circle moments. Like there's just so many in my life. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
that is so interesting. Like I never questioned why like they chose me to go to Virginia Beach out of all these other people. Like it was just so random. Like I don't know. It's really not random because I know like everything's lined up, but it's just like weird how everything just like always works out.
Yeah. No, it's funny like that. Yeah. Well, cool. So you were doing some miles with the puppy.
Mhm.
And then were you just like you said you were doing 1 mile and then 2 miles, so you were just building distance from that point, just like based on feel for the most part?
Yeah, I was definitely not in a routine. I still like was doing more strength training than running, but I was gradually, when I returned to Richmond and we were in COVID, that's when I was like, oh, I have all this free time. I can actually like run more and like have the time to run more. So that's when I started increasing my mileage just a little bit to like 4 miles or 5 miles. Nothing, super crazy, but from compared to like my 1 or 2 miles a couple months before, I felt really good with it. So I started increasing my mileage. I guess that was 2020. And then I don't really remember the rest of 2020, to be honest.
It was a blur for all of us,
It
so.
was such a blur. I know I was just like doing my own thing, but like staying in shape. And I guess then my first true half marathon was fall 2021. So I guess that was still a blur though. Like why did I choose to sign up for that? I don't even remember, to be honest. That
Yeah,
seems so long ago.
it does. Yeah, it feels really long ago and not long ago at the same time. Like 2021 was yesterday and 10 years
Yeah.
ago somehow.
I know, but I'm just thinking like why did I sign up for it? Maybe I wanted like to maybe I was feeling good with my runs and I was like, I'm going to try it again. That must have been it. It must have been an impulsive decision like most of my races are. So
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. So we ended up on the calendar at some point. You said fall 2021 was when that one was taking place?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I know you said a lot of it's a blur, but do you remember much about training for that first half marathon and how we kind of got from like 5 miles ish to building up to that distance?
Yeah, I actually do remember the training. I remember I actually was strength training when I was training. I remember I actually was sticking to base building first and then transitioned into my training. I remember running they were all solo miles for my long runs. And I also remember I didn't fuel at all during my half, and I remember I didn't taper at all.
Yeah. So we got to race day. Maybe we were crawling to race day at that point, but
Yeah.
we got there. So fuel, everything, that was all brand new for you. You hadn't quite looked into that for your first half marathon.
Yeah.
But how did it feel completing your first half marathon? Like what was that experience like?
Oh, that was one I'll never ever forget. I feel like when you run your first race, and it doesn't even matter what distance it is, it's just like you experience like 10 different emotions in the span of like 5 minutes. So, or in this case, it was like the span of 3 miles. So I remember, I mean, it's not that I chose not to fuel and it's not that I chose not to taper. I literally just did not know. I didn't
Yeah,
even know
yeah.
what the word taper meant. Like, my fueling was taking a salt stick at mile 10, which is like the salt tablet.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was pretty bad. I remember I remember feeling great. I went really fast off from the beginning. I felt great. And I remember mile 10, I wanted to call my boyfriend, who's now my fiance, and be like, can you pick me up? Like, this is insane. I'm literally dying. And I didn't because I was too tired to reach for my phone, which was good. I was also running with phone in hand. There's no
Oh, love
belt.
it.
Like, I
Yeah.
didn't know anything. I remember my mom was like, are you really going to use like the Beats headphones that stick into your ears? Like, you're not going to be able to hear the crowd. And I was like, oh, like she was like, here, try these shocks. Like, I use the shock. Like, I just didn't know anything about a race. I didn't know anything about higher mileage. So 10 miles, I walked a little bit and I was like, all right, like I have 3 more, like just get through it. Just like you can do it, slow down, get through it. And I remember it was like an amazing feeling crossing the finish line. And I feel like I stuck onto that feeling. And all I can think of was like when I was done with that race and had time to reflect, I was like, wow, that was really cool. I know I can do better because I literally was like, I saw it as like I was starving, I was tired. Like I didn't see it as like I got to get my fueling strategy down because
Right. Yeah,
I
you just
had
don't
no
know.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, I had a weird mindset about fueling. I thought that fueling at that time was only for like elite runners or like marathon runners. I didn't realize it was like any run after 60 minutes pretty much. So that was a big mindset shift for me, was that, yeah, it's okay if you're not like the fastest of the fast. You still should probably be fueling. So that was a very interesting like realm of a couple months just with like half marathon training. I remember saying I will never do that again, and then the next year I did
Classic.
another half.
Yeah.
It's always nice. So I did another half the following year, same half marathon. I think I fueled I don't even remember. I might have not even fueled for that. No, I take that back. I think I fueled once. So there was some progress.
Yeah.
Like I think I
We're
took
making steps.
something. I think I took something at mile 10. Like there was literally like it was once. And yeah, I don't think I was into fueling for that one either. I think I just literally didn't know because it was basically like I did a half marathon in 2021. I did a half marathon in 2022. And then 2023 was my first full. And my first full was the most eye-opening experience in terms of like training, because that's where I actually learned how to fuel. So I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure I didn't fuel for my first 2 halves.
Yeah. No, I think that's pretty I've heard that a couple of times, and I can relate to that too. For your first race and training for your first race is just, yeah, you don't know what you don't know.
Yep.
And having that thought that, I think we all don't feel like we're runners in the beginning, and that's
Mhm.
the hang up we get on is, okay, well, I'm not a runner, I'm just doing this because why not?
Mhm.
And so I don't need to fuel, I don't need to get into all of this stuff. I hear that with shoes too, like I don't need to buy good shoes because I'm not a real runner.
Mhm.
Which is so silly that that's like guidelines that we put on ourselves, that somehow we constructed that in our own brains, that, oh, I've only been running for this amount of time, so I can't invest in myself here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think that that's something that a lot of people can relate to for sure. um, but cool, so we ran second half marathon, and then a year later, you said about a year later, we ran a full.
Mhm. Mhm.
What's the in between? How did we get from point A to point B?
So I think one of the big turning points for me was not my second half. It was actually the spring after the half, because all the halves that I ran were in the fall. So the
Mm,
spring after that half, I ran a 10K. And I also had COVID around my second half. So I didn't have like big goals for that half. So I had COVID. I ran a 10K in the fall or in the spring of 2023. And I remember this was like the biggest turn. This was one of like those big turning points in my running journey. I remember after the 10K, I just remember thinking like I thought I had gone all out, and I was really mad at myself that I didn't PR it because I had run a previous 10K. I don't even know
mhm.
when the timeline was, but I ran a previous 10K. And I remember being really mad that I didn't PR it. I remember thinking like, how do people run this fast for longer periods of time? Like, I don't even know why that crossed my mind, but I was just like, this is only 10 or only 6 miles or whatever. Like, why do I feel like I just went as fast as I could? My heart was beating out of my chest. I trained so hard for this 10K, and I didn't even PR it. Like, I was beating myself up. And I also just felt so like it was really like my heart was beating out of my chest. Like, I don't even know
Yeah.
how else to say it, but I didn't feel great, to be honest. I did not feel great. I basically knew something had to change. But I thought when I was thinking back to it, I was like, that was really weird that I was thinking, like, how do people run fast and for longer distances? Because, like, I pretty much had the same, like, I had a similar-ish pace with my half to my 10K. Like, my
Mm.
paces were literally a wreck. There was no rhyme. Like, I don't know. It was just chaos. There was chaos
Yeah.
in training. It was just chaos. There was no like, this is my 10K pace and this is my, no, it was just, I only knew one speed. So I remember thinking that, and I was like, all right, my heart like feels awful. Like, I feel like I could just pass out right now.
Yeah.
So I knew when I went home, I knew I had to do some sort of heart rate training. There was some sort of hype around it on social media. And I was like, I should probably check this out, because even when I was training for the 10K, like, and I would go for a jog, my heart rate would spike to like 170, 175. Like, I don't know if this was, I'm pretty sure this was like a side effect of COVID, like long term side effect of COVID, but it was just, I knew my heart rate was always like so high during training.
Mm.
I just didn't know what to do about it. So when I got home from that 10K, I was like, I'm going to do some research to see how I even start with heart rate training, because my heart rate needs to be lower. Like, it's just so high at a jog. So I started with zone 2 training, and that is what actually, that was like my big turning point that led me into running a marathon. I hadn't even thought about running a marathon before I started zone 2, because I basically trained in zone 2 for a couple months. That's all I did. And I realized, oh, this is how people like build their endurance. Like,
Mm.
it forced me to slow down. So that is how I started this like curiosity around, oh, this is how I can like, quote, easily increase my endurance without feeling terrible. Like, this is
Right, right.
awesome. So that was a really big turning point for me.
Cool. Yeah, zone 2. I agree. There was like a social media boom where everybody all of a sudden was started talking about zone 2, or that's what it felt
Yeah.
like. So what sort of like what did you find out, I guess, resource wise about zone 2 that you carried on? Was it like a specific plan, or you were just going out and doing your normal training runs and just trying to keep yourself in
Mhm.
zone 2? Like what were you researching at that point?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing I was researching was one, how do I even like set up my zone 2 heart rate? And then I I think I read I think I started reading the book 80/20 running. It's basically talks about like zone 2 running. I had done some research on it just on the internet though, but I just decided like okay, I had no races on the plan for the summer and the fall. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to do 100% zone 2. Like I literally thought that my heart was like going to just explode if I kept doing speed work. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm just going to do 100% zone 2. So I started doing my 4 runs all in zone 2. That was really tough because if you know Richmond, you know it's humid as it transitions into summer. So that was like a big ego check because previous to that, I was that runner that was like my race pace was like 9 to 9:30 and I was like I never run my easier efforts past like a 10-minute mile. Like I just was like, that's my mindset. I don't know where I got that, but that was like my mindset. So the fact that I had to put that to the side, and I think what helped me was I didn't even worry about my pace. Like I did in the beginning, it definitely hurt, but I stopped worrying about my pace when I was focusing on zone 2. So my bumpers or like my blinders were just on staying in this one heart rate zone. It wasn't about my pace or like, oh, you're slower than a 10-minute mile. Like you are now labeling yourself as X runner. Like it was never that. It was just, okay, like I know I have to do this for my health. I knew it could help just lower my heart rate in general. And then I was curious about the whole like it just building my endurance. Like I think I was just a lot of curiosity. And it was also like, okay, let me try this for 3 months and see if it helps. And if it doesn't help, like I'm literally in the same spot. It's not gonna
Right, right. Yeah,
change
you're not losing
anything.
anything.
Yeah, it's not like I'm really risking a lot here. So I think that was like just having that mindset helped me a lot.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, a lot of people talk about slowing down, but something like zone 2, it's not just like you said, it can drive you crazy when you have a certain pace in mind and then you have to pull back. So having something like zone 2 where you're still paying attention to something and you're still shooting for something, but it's not a pace goal, I think is super helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool.
So that's when I was like, oh, okay, like I can run. I was like, my long run was like, I want to say like 60 to 70 minutes. And I was like, oh, like I'm not even tired after. Like, this is amazing. Like, if you finally learn to slow down on your like easier effort pace, or AKA it could be that you're training in zone 2, you realize that you have probably been going out too fast and that you don't need to feel completely exhausted after a lot of your runs. I
Yeah.
mean, yes, if you're running like super high mileage, you might feel a certain way after your runs and that's fine, but most of like your runs you're not going to feel completely exhausted. Like you're crawling to like finish the run basically. So that's when I was like, oh, well, if I can do this, I wonder if I can run a marathon. And then I just kind of went down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask next is how did this like transition into marathon mindset? So that's cool. So that you went right into that.
Mhm.
How many weeks out were you from when you raced, when you started to think about, hey, maybe I could do this thing?
It was June I started thinking about it, and the race was in November. So like
Okay,
five-ish, maybe
cool.
4-ish. I don't even know. I was far enough out where I had built a decent base. I will say it wasn't like the largest base, but it was a decent base to where I could transition smoothly into marathon training. But signing up for the marathon scared me too much, so I held off on signing up for like 2 months.
Mm.
I just
Did you start a
trained
plan?
like I
Okay.
was.
Yeah, yeah, okay, that's what I was gonna ask. Yeah. So did you seek out any specific plan if you remember that you were planning on following to get to the marathon day?
Yeah, so Richmond has a marathon training team that meets on Saturdays.
Cool.
So a friend told me about that and I signed up for that just to like have someone to run with in a group for my long run. So I started running with them and I followed their plan on Saturdays, which was like our long run day, and then during the week, I actually created my own training plan from the book 80/20 Running by Matt Fitzgerald. That was, I don't know if I'd recommend doing that. That was a lot of work, to be honest. The other reason I don't really recommend it, so I say it was a lot of work because a lot of his training plans are running 6 to 7 days a week. And I was like,
Oh,
I'm
wow.
running
That's a
4
lot.
max. Um, 4 was already a lot for me. I'd always only run 3 days a week. So 4 was like a good jump for me. So I had to do a lot of calculations to make that training plan. And the other reason I don't know if I recommend doing that, he does train in heart rate zones. So it's not like 1 mile at marathon pace, it's 1 mile at zone 3.
Mm.
I think it was fine for me. Like, I don't regret it per se, but if we fast forward to when I was tapering for the first marathon, I went completely nuts. I was totally overthinking, like, what is my marathon pace? Because I had never trained in marathon pace. I was like,
Mm.
I know my zone 3 pace, but what is my
Right.
marathon pace? Like, I don't even know what I can hold. So I don't, that's why I'm saying, like, when I compare my training plans and like my confidence in my marathon pace, I'm 100 times more confident this year compared to last year. I remember the day before the race, I was like looking up like marathon calculators. I was like, I wonder if I can hold this pace. Like, I literally had no
Yeah.
idea. So there was no like race strategy, or like there wasn't much race like strategic planning for my pace during the marathon. So I think that's another reason, like, I don't know if I recommend training in zones for the entire week, but I do recommend like hitting different zones throughout the week, if
Sure,
that makes
sure.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, like having specific workouts basically where you're focusing on zone. Is that's kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
like each having like a variety of different paces throughout the week is going to put you
Yeah,
in different zones.
for sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cool. And then you said that for your first couple half marathons, fuel was something that you hadn't quite dialed in yet. Were you starting to learn about fuel as you were training for your first marathon?
Yes, I was. And I remember when I signed up for it, I was like, okay, I'm going into this race and training. I know I don't even like I was like, I don't even know if I can do this. So I need to be an open book, and I need to basically take in any advice that someone gives to me. And that's when I started like really looking into like on Instagram accounts, like what are dietitians posting about? Oh, like I need to real like I wouldn't, like when you're playing softball and you're younger, you're like, I'm an athlete. And then kind of like when you graduate and like you're like past the college days, you're like, I'm no longer an athlete. It was
Yeah.
like a weird like mindset shift I had to get past, was like, no, you're an athlete now. Like, you are training as an endurance athlete. I mean, all runners should have that mindset. It just took me a lot to get to that mindset again. But that was one thing that I was like, okay, I need to eat like an athlete. I need to sleep like an athlete. I need to fuel like an athlete. Like, I need to hydrate like an athlete. Like, it was just so many things where I like basically needed that little push from marathon training to get over that like fueling mindset of I don't need to fuel.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's so important. And we talked about it in the beginning a little bit, but yeah, that mindset shift of going, I don't deserve to learn about these things, to do these things, to treat myself with these things. To no, I do, and if I don't, I could potentially be harming myself and not perform the best that I could perform, and all that good stuff. So
Mhm.
it's totally mental. It's crazy how much our own brains can impact the way that we operate as runners.
Yeah, and it's also really interesting. Like, I guarantee if we look at any runner, like there's things that we tell ourselves that we don't even realize we are telling ourselves that.
Yeah,
Because it
for
could have been
sure.
like a thought from like 5 years ago that passed us, and we still subconsciously even like hang on to that thought. Like, I don't know, there's just so many of them that I think of that like marathon training unlocked for me in a really good way, because then I was like, oh, I actually like need to fuel. Like, oh, why haven't I been fueling? Oh, because I thought that was like only for these types of runners.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting the things that we tell ourselves, and just how much we hold on to like a certain thought, or like even if someone like said something negative to a runner, and like we can still hold on to like that and label ourselves as something. So I always say like, it's really good to always just be like an open book and like not be against learning like anything new. You can learn something from like literally any experience or anyone. It could be learning something good, it could be learning something bad, but I always just say like try to really be like an open book when, especially when you're doing like a new distance or a higher distance where you need a lot of support throughout training.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I agree. Okay, cool. So we got to marathon day, obviously. Taper, you said it was driving you crazy, but we got there. What was your first marathon experience like? Was there any logistics leading up to it that was complicated or pretty smooth sailing? How did we get to start line?
So marathon day, it was very exciting for me. I had a lot of support and I really appreciate that. I had support from friends and family throughout the entire course. Like I think I had like 4 or 5 stops of like friends and family.
Oh, that's great.
So I really appreciated that. I think that helped my mindset for the race. I think also like I'm the type of person that feeds off of energy from other people. So I appreciated like all like obviously everyone that shows up, but it's such a positive experience. So I ran the Richmond Marathon. Richmond Marathon's known as America's friendliest marathon, and I will say that it
I didn't
is.
know that.
It's really, really like supportive and fun, like most marathons should be, and like most marathons are. But I will say, like my mindset was actually very positive during the race. I had my fueling strategy was down to a T. I fueled every 30 minutes.
Nice.
Except at the end, that was a different story. But for the most part, I fueled every 30 minutes and I feel like it was just like a pretty positive experience. I don't know, like there's just obviously like adrenaline and endorphins, and then you're excited and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm about to like finish my first marathon. Like I feel like it really wasn't like a bad experience considering like how much I did not plan for like my race day. The only thing I really planned for was like my fueling and where my friends and family were going to be.
Yeah. Which are important. The friends and family can push you through a lot for sure. The spectator help is so important. So I guess what was your longest run that you did in training? I forgot to ask about that.
Yeah, so I did a 20 miler in training last year. I will say like last year when I was training for my first marathon, one of the big mindset shifts, I know like I'll get to my long runs, but one of the big mindset shifts that I've had between my first marathon and my second is, when like you have a hard long run or you have a hard speed workout. Like I remember my 16 miler, I did it. So I live in Richmond. It's 200 feet above sea level. And I did my 16 miler in Colorado, 8,500 feet above sea level.
Huge.
Elk were mating and chasing me literally the entire time.
No way.
It was the worst run of my entire life. Like it was very mentally difficult. I couldn't breathe. Like zone 2 was out the window. I couldn't breathe. Yeah. I remember barely, like I was literally like barely finishing this run. I like refused to give up and I was like, I will do this. So like mentally it did teach me a lot, but I just remember like finishing the run and like my parents were like, so I went on the trip with them and my mom was like, you don't look good. Like, are you about to pass out? Like, what is going on? Like your face is so white. You look like a ghost. It's like, I don't feel good at all. Like it was just awful. It was an awful training run. And I remember telling myself, how am I ever going to run 10 more miles after that? Like, how am I ever going to do that? So I would go down these rabbit holes in my training where it was like, well, if you think that's hard, like how am I ever going to run 26.2? So fast forward to this training cycle. And one thing I've been telling myself is these training runs are going to be harder than the race. Because when I look back at it, that 16 miler, 10 times harder than the marathon was. Even though the marathon's obviously hard, like the training runs will always be harder than the race. And if I can tell myself that during like this training cycle, it cancels out that thought process of, well, if you think this, like the negative rabbit hole where it's like, if you think this is hard, wait till you actually run 10 more, like how am I ever going to run 10 more? So that sort of mindset shift has really, really helped me where I just tell myself, even if it's like not even if I don't feel like it was like the hardest workout ever, I just remind myself that training run is going to be harder than the actual race. And I feel like it just keeps my confidence at a high. I'm not like going, I don't know about you, but I just go down these rabbit holes all
Oh,
the
for
time.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Just overthinking everything. So yeah, I ran my 20 miler. I ran a 20 miler last year. This year I'm doing something a little bit different. So my 20 miler took 4 hours. It was a long run. So this year I am doing 3 18 milers because my pace, I've been slowing my pace down for my longer runs. So I'm doing like around the 3 hour mark for three 18 milers.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I like that adjustment a lot. So, yeah, and you're 100% right. The first time around, you think the marathon is going to be the hardest thing that you've ever put yourself through because it's like the line that you're trying to get to for however many weeks you're training for it.
Yep.
But yeah, even training for my second one now, like there's some days where the run that it's the same exact distance, same exact route that I did the week before is just like 30 times harder for absolutely no reason. Or maybe it's weather, maybe it's like I didn't sleep well enough or whatever. So you just you can't compare your training runs to what marathon day is going to be like at all, for sure. I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and especially like, I mean, most runners are going to feed off of other runners. Like we're doing this all together during the race. It's not like you're alone. So if you're running like these solo miles alone, like that is to me 10 times harder. And that is, I
Yeah.
mean, I like to switch it up. I've been switching it up this training cycle too, if I'm running it alone or with someone or in a group. So I appreciate like both sides to it, but I also know it's like if I can get through that, like I know I can get through this race where people are cheering for me and I have things to look forward to at the end. And it's just like the adrenaline's there, the caffeine is there. So there's just like so many other factors. So I want, like, if you're running your first marathon, remember that you 100% can do it because you've made it through. Like the marathon is a training cycle. The marathon, like the actual race day, is like icing on the cake. Like there's nothing else that you can do. You've done the hard part. Like I promise you've done the hard part. It's just executing the plan.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Such a good way to look at race day for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Um Cool. Well, what are some other things that you've done that you did the first time around that you're now changing your second time around that's felt a little bit better or different?
Yeah, I feel like I mean, if anyone's like listening to this and they're like, I just feel like I've made so many mistakes this training cycle, and like, I'm just like the queen of making mistakes, but I'm also the queen of voicing these mistakes to everyone so you don't have to make them.
I
Um,
love that.
I don't know. I mean, it's just not even, it's just with life. Like, I feel like I just make so many mistakes, but I learn from the mistakes and I'm able to adjust the plan if I need to. So, another mistake I made, let's see. Okay, so one big mistake that I made was last year I stuck to like two different gel slash foods for my fueling. And I remember 3 weeks out, or no, I guess it was 4 weeks out from the race because I did a 3 week taper. I remember I was on like a 10 miler during the week and I ate like the honey stinger like waffle things.
Mhm.
And I remember being like, how am I going to eat this and run at the same time during the race?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I should probably like try another fuel at this point. And I was like, well, I have a 20 miler in like 4 days. Like maybe I should try that. And then I was like, oh, maybe I should try like caffeine. Like I just tried these. I thought I had my fueling strategy down in terms of what I was going to use, but I didn't try other things. I wish I would have tried. Like I thought I liked what I liked and I kind of stuck with it, but I wish I tried and sampled other fuel during the actual training runs, like fuel with caffeine or fuel with like more sodium or fuel with more carbs, and like really tried something else other than I was basically doing UCAN and the honey singer waffle back, just like alternating.
Yeah.
So to come my 20 miler, that's when I tried caffeine for the first time on a run. So it was kind of like a little last minute, but it all worked out. So I would try different fuel. Like there's nothing wrong with like sampling different fuels. So this year I'm definitely doing like a couple different fuels that I've tried, like even if it's on like a medium long run or a long run. just seeing what I actually like and what works well with me. So that's been super helpful too.
Yeah. Yeah, trial and error is huge with fuel for sure. Have you ever had have you ever gone on a run and been able to rule out something right away in terms of fuel?
Oh my gosh. So the Richmond Marathon is sponsor, or I guess Goo,
Mhm.
GU, whatever,
Yeah.
sponsors the Richmond Marathon. I I don't know. I think I don't like gels too. I think I'm also just like turning into like a picky old lady because I'm like, oh, this is disgusting. Like
Yeah.
this texture is so gross. So I don't know. I was just like, I can't even like swallow this. This is
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
disgusting. So I'm very like, I'm like that now with shoes and just like things in general. Now I'm just like, if I off the bat do not like it, I will not be forcing myself to
Yeah.
take that in. So yeah, there's definitely a couple things. I don't know. And then like some people on social media, like I ask a lot of advice on social media, like what fuel should I try? And some people will be like, I'll be like, I don't like this fuel at all. Like, I feel like it should be somewhat decent, you know? But people are like, it's gel. What do you expect? And I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
oh, yeah. So we're just like torturing ourselves while we're running. That's good. So
Yeah.
I have chosen to do more of like the fun food. I don't know if that's even the right thing to say, but more of like fuel that I actually enjoy
Yeah.
taking, and that's made a really big difference versus just thinking I have to take it because like there's a ton of gel out there, a ton. There's like when I asked like what I should take, it was probably like 100 different gels and I was like I cannot take all these. I can't try all
Yeah.
these. But I did try some that I really like. I can share them if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
So one thing that I really like is the Crank Sports e-gel. They have a lot of sodium in them, which I appreciate, and then they have a lot of carbs in them. So I don't even know what it is off the bat, but I took 2 today during my run along with others. So I like to mix in also gummies, like just
Mm.
they're from Trader Joe's.
Yeah.
The
Like candy.
yeah, basically like chewy candy because I found that if I'm looking at like a honey stinger chew, like there's nothing wrong with them, but as we know, they're pretty pricey for like one serving. And if you look at like gummy, like Sour Patch straws or gummy bears, you can see that, they're not far off from sugars and carbs. Yes, you can argue that it's different sugars, but in general, like I'm not taking them for the entire run. I'm just
Right.
mixing them in. So I've been doing like some more gummies. I've tried like not Nutri-Grain bars. No, I got no fig bars. Fig bars. The
Yeah.
Nature's Bakery fig bars.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know
So
what you're
those
talking
have
about.
been good. But my favorite gel, like I've scratched most gels now. My favorite gel is the Crank Sports because their flavors, I'm actually like, oh, this is good. This is like, this actually tastes legit. Oh, another one that I've liked is the Untapped. It's like maple syrup.
I just tried that for the first time. I actually really liked it. Yeah.
It's good. I will say, do you know what flavor you tried?
I think I just tried the
Original.
original. Yeah.
So my favorite is the s'mores. I think it's the
Okay.
s'mores. Yeah. So they will be on the course at Marine Corps. I'm not like gonna count on them for my fueling, but I just, if I need something, then I know that I will like it. I know that I can digest it and it will settle well. So I've actually really appreciated those as well. Just like change in texture. I think that's something else for me. Like change in texture, change in taste. But it just shows like you have to do what works best for you.
100%.
It's like the only way to continue enjoying what you are doing.
100%. Yeah, and if you think about it, like you get to race day, if you're taking fuel or you've only taken fuel that you're comfortable with that you maybe don't really like you were saying the goo, the texture, people are forcing themselves to take it, like it's already going to be hard to fuel. Do you really want something
Mhm.
that you're not looking forward to taking to make it harder to fuel? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, I know. I know. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're like a couple weeks out from race day, it's okay if you try some fuel. Like, I don't think it's
Yeah.
too late. Like, maybe, maybe try it sooner than later. But I mean, I scrammed with my fueling strategy and I scrammed with finding my marathon shoes. So I'm like a last minute girly.
We all are. Don't worry. Cool. So we're training. I'm curious too. We've talked a little bit about your story as a physical therapist and how you kind of got into it, but if you don't mind, maybe touching on like some advice that you have from that perspective for runners that you've found impactful over time.
Yeah, sure. So one of the biggest things I think, one thing that is popping up a lot on my social media, I don't know if you guys are thinking it, but the whole idea behind like, oh, I got hurt. I used to hear this a lot when I would work in Nova, but it was like, oh, I got hurt because I didn't stretch. And it's like, okay, well, don't beat yourself up over not stretching. There's a million reasons your injury could have came on. And I think we as runners prioritize things outside of running that don't move the needle as much as we think. That could be moving the needle in terms of building our strength as a runner. That could be moving the needle in terms of injury prevention, in terms of building our speed, improving performance. There's not that many things you need to do. I mean, I say that, I'll list them. It's going to sound like a lot, but there's a lot of things that people do that don't really move the needle as much as we think. So like, for example, we like priorities outside of running should be sleep, fueling, hydration, strength training, rest days, and probably like some mobility work.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at that, like compression sleeves or what are they called? The compression boots, like not needed. Even like foam rolling, if you're going to do it, I recommend doing it before your run. So I will tie that in with mobility, but we don't need to do that for 30 minutes at night. Research really shows it's most effective pre-run if we do it for 90 seconds minimum. So I don't, or like even static stretching, like we don't need to be a gymnast in flexibility to run. It's actually not, most of the time, not helping us, because then we're on that more of like that hypermobile spectrum, and that's just going to cause instability. So I think a lot of runners will, I don't know, I'm just kind of blanking on what other people prioritize, but I think it's like there's always like a new recovery tool or like a new thing we should be doing, but we always just need to come back to the basics.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I hear a lot of people say, like, oh, I got injured myself where I started to feel uncomfortable, so I switched shoes. Like, even if the shoes were brand new. I know you touched on that a little bit in the beginning, but what are your thoughts on, like, oh, let me fix the problem by just going and buying another $120 pair of shoes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with trying new shoes, but I think there's something wrong with expecting a new, like, this is, see, running injuries are a little complicated because I don't want you thinking like, oh, I just need to get new shoes and everything's going to be better. Most of the time, that's not the answer, but there are some cases where it's like, say you try, like, I remember when I first tried Hoka's and I hated them. And I remember I was like, my big toe hurts after I did this one run in these Hoka's. My big toe has never hurt before that. Okay, it's probably that my foot didn't agree with the shoe.
Yeah.
That's fine for like, let me return the shoe and stick with what I know, versus being like, oh, I have shin splints, I just need to get new shoes. Sure, you can try new shoes, but don't neglect the fact that you probably need to strengthen some sort of part on your foot and ankle. You probably need to look at your training schedule and see if there's anything going on with that. I think it's actually really interesting now that I'm like learning more about shoes, reading research on shoes. Like if you go to a shoe store, most of the time they'll put you on like a foot scanner thing. They will put you in different shoes, see how you're walking or even running, and see what works best for you, which is fine. But there's research that like literally debunks all of the things that a lot of shoe stores will tell you. They'll say the foot scanner is not even accurate, or which is true, or the fact that a flat foot needs a stability shoe. Not always true. Sometimes you just have to pick a shoe that's light and that's comfortable for you. Not every flat foot is going to appreciate a stability shoe. Same with like a high arch needs like a really soft cushioned shoe. Not always true. It's just so person dependent. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you just have to think what is comfortable to me and what is lightweight. Those are like the two main things. Like, does it feel good to me and is it a lightweight shoe? If you're saying yes to both, then, you know, I think you found your right shoe versus being like, I need a stability shoe. Like, okay, but you know how shoe companies change up their shoes like all the time, all
All
the
the
time.
time. Yeah.
So not every stability shoe is going to work for a flat foot. I mean, I have flat feet, so I know that. I've hated a ton of stability shoes recently. So I think it really just comes down to like, don't worry so much about the fluff of a shoe, worry about what feels comfortable to you.
Yeah. Me taking notes over here. I'm like, I gotta go get new shoes soon. But no, I think that's great. Yeah, the running stores I think are a great place to start, especially if you're in the beginning. You can get
Mhm.
some advice, at least like get a baseline understanding of what types of shoes are out there, you know. But yeah, over
Yeah.
time, if you try stuff and you like them and it doesn't fit into the box that you thought that your foot type fit into,
Mhm.
it sounds like that's something that you can kind of take on a more individual basis, which is important for sure.
Yeah, I recently ran my last 18 miler last weekend in the Asics Nova Blast, I think.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, you're going to love these. You're going to love these. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, I like Asics usually. I wanted to literally throw them off the bridge at mile 10.
Oh no.
Like, I was like, these are awful, awful. I thought they were going to be my marathon shoe. For real. I was like, oh, these are so sick. Like, I walked a mile in them. Like,
Yeah.
they feel great. And then come like after around the 3 hour mark, I was like, oh my gosh, the toe box is so narrow. So it just shows like there's so many other aspects to picking a shoe that works for you versus just saying like, oh, it's a stability shoe. It has the guardrails. Oh, another thing I want to point out that is very interesting that might be just a little eye-opening if you're the type of runner who thinks like, I need a shoe that controls pronation. I overpronate. First of all, I don't want you to be afraid of pronation. It is a motion of our foot and ankle that we need to go into as we push off the ground. We literally need to go into it. If you overpronate, it does not mean that you have an injury or anything like that.
Mm.
Definitely talk to your PT about it, but just saying I'm an overpronator, that doesn't give me any information as PT. I need to look more into what's going on. It's also overpronation is not a diagnosis. Going a little bit on a soapbox with pronation, but
I
what's
love it.
really interesting about the research with pronation is that they found that most people think that, I wonder how far this can go. I'm like such a visual person. So most
Yeah.
people think that you are in max pronation when your foot's on the ground and then your other leg is swinging through. But research has actually found that we're in the most pronation as our heel is lifted off the ground and then our ball of our foot and our toes are still on the ground. So we haven't left the ground yet. We're just about to. And if you think about that, you think, oh, well, what are these guardrails really doing on our shoe? Because our foot's not even on the ground. How is it going to prevent that much over pronation? So I think it just shows like you have to rely on your foot and ankle strength more than a shoe doing like XYZ for you. I think that's like the big summary of it. Our shoes don't do as much as we think they do. That's why they should just be comfortable, lightweight, something that you actually like.
Right. Oh, that's such a good point. I'm just like taking it all in. That's such a good point. Yeah, you should rely on strengthening your foot. I've heard, I haven't done much research on it myself, but I've heard a lot of people talking about online like how cushier shoes or shoes that do a little bit more for your foot is actually like could be harmful long term because it's your foot isn't getting any stronger. It's like almost doing too much for you or taking too much into account. So yeah, if
Mhm.
you can rely on yourself a little bit more than rely on your shoe, I could see where that could be really helpful long term.
Yeah, and I mean, it's different shoes for different mileage too. Like, don't be
Yeah,
afraid. You don't need to have, my closet's
a
like full of
million.
running
Yeah.
shoes. So, like, you don't need to have a million running shoes, but just have like maybe two or three that you're cycling through, and that will also help. And they should be around the same heel drop. So, heel drop, something really important to look at. It shouldn't be like a Brooks Ghost where it's a 12 millimeter drop, and then a Hoka Clifton where it's like a 4 millimeter drop. You want it to be like around a similar heel drop, but just rotating through like a couple different shoes. They could all be the same brand, different shoe, different brands, different shoes. Like, I think that's perfectly fine. You might find that like one shoe is great for 2 or 3 mile runs and the other shoe is great for like longer runs. There's no one shoe that's like gonna, I mean, some people will say that there is, but I don't know if I agree with that. There's no one shoe that's going to be great for every single type of workout, especially as you get into like higher mileage too.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I love this shoe tangent we found ourselves on. It's so important. I feel like everybody talks about shoes, but talking about the actual like how to make a decision on shoes is so important for
Yeah.
sure.
And I think I love the way that running stores and like brands are going in this direction of like you have 30 days to try it out, or like I get all my shoes from Running
Same, yeah.
Warehouse. Like, shameless plug, I love Running Warehouse. I work with them all the time. They are amazing because they give you a 90-day return. It's like a 90-day return policy, and you can wear your shoe as much as you want in those 90 days. So you don't have the pressure of like having to like force yourself to like a shoe or anything like that. I think that's amazing. They will literally like send you the shoe, send you the return label with the shoe. So if you don't like it, it's so simple. But obviously if you're like looking for a new shoe, I would go to a running store and like try tons of pairs on. Like, I don't care if you think you're annoying the employee, that's their job. Try like 10 pairs on. There's so many different shoes now. So like, it's okay to try a variety on. You're only going to know if you like a shoe when you figure out the shoes that you don't like. So I think that's really, really big, is like try different shoes on, try different brands on, try different heel drops on, and try different toe boxes, like the width of the toe box. Like, so important to just a lot of trial and error before you actually find a decent shoe that you like too.
For sure. Yeah. Cool. So you said you're still on the hunt for your race day shoe?
I think I found it. I don't know if I'm speaking too early, but I think I found it. So I think today I ran my 16 miler in the New Balance. It's like the long name. It's like the New Balance Fuel Cell Super Comp V3 Trainer or something like that.
It's getting so ridiculous, the names. Oh my gosh.
I really liked it. It is a trainer shoe, but I'm like, if it works, it works. I have run like maybe like 3 runs in it, and then this long run, and I really have liked the shoes that New Balance has put out. Like, some of them are very, very soft in the sole, I will say. This one is a carbon plated shoe, so it's not as soft, but it's still like not too firm, not too squishy. It has good toe box. It fit really well. So I think right now, I mean, I don't know, I'm a last minute girl, so it could be that I just changed my shoe up the week before. Who knows? But my number one pick is that shoe.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to see. We'll follow along on your shoe journey and see if anything changes before race day. But cool. So thank you so much for talking through all of that. That was great to get to know you and get to know your journey, how we got to this point. And it's super exciting that you're training for your second one right now. So if anybody wants to continue to follow along with, we got to see how the shoe thing ends up. That's the most important, but also to follow along with Marine Corps, where can they find you?
Yeah. So again, thank you so much. My Instagram is dr.lisa.dpt. So Dr. Lisa DPT. Let's see, that's the same with like my YouTube and TikTok. And then my podcast, where I talk a little bit, I just released, I don't even know when this is coming out, but I just released an episode on my mindset shifts, where I go a little bit deeper into some shifts that I'm making from my first marathon and my second. So that podcast is titled Rehab for Runners. And I go more into like research on certain topics with that. So feel free to message me too if you have any questions. I feel like I really love to connect with like the running community, give you my advice, take it or leave it, but I do like to really connect. So feel free to message me if you have any questions about anything I said.
Cool. I love that. Awesome. Well, thanks again. I'm excited to see how everything turns out for you. And yeah, we'll be in touch. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Taylor.
Thank you so much for tuning into another episode. If you're enjoying My First Marathon, it would mean the world to me if you could rate and review the show. And if you or someone you know has ran a marathon and would like to share your story, I have a guest form to fill out in my bio on Instagram. That username is @MyFirstMarathonPod. See you on the next one.